What's up? What's up? How's everybody doing? This is Rother with New Era Gardener, and I'm going to start an experiment as worm farmers. Whether you're selling your worms, producing worms for sale, or for the castings or the compost, we're always trying to find many ways of feeding our worms. So as we all do, we find videos and we look at what they are and we find different ways of doing farming. Some things help us, some things don't work for us based on our technology, how we're doing it, how we're doing our bedding, or how we're feeding our worms. But everything is trial and error. So I was watching a video and I was watching a guy who feeds his worms, and what he used was some peat moss, and he never really said what he put into it. So, you know, that starts to get me thinking what you put in is what you get out. And that's how I always go at what I do with my worms and how I feed my worms. I like peat moss a whole lot better. I do sift mine. I break it up, sift it. I like to use all the fine stuff. So I'm going to experiment with making my own worm food. But I'm using some of the basic things we all already use. So I'm going to start off with using biochar. And I think that most people who are worm farmers or worm farmers doing either worms or making worm castings, I think this is an underrated used item in your worm bedding, in your food, and things like that. I I make and sell biochar. I make active biochar. I sell that also. I use my own product. I see the benefits of it. So this is some biochar, and this is the small flakes and powder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sift this and get all the powder out of it. And that's what I'm going to use. So I just got a colander that I actually have. And you know how it is. We need a colander for different things. And I really want the fine stuff. So I'm using this particular colander instead of using the 1/8 sifter that I have, because I really just want the fine stuff, no flakes. I just want the fine biochar. And that's going to be the base. And this is what you end up with. The powder. Nice powder. So to that, which I already have, and this is something for a start. It's just an experiment. This is 2 cups of biochar. So the worms, being this fine, it's like food for them. The microbes, moisture, and everything will attach itself. They will eat this because it's so fine, and it will go through their system, come out in their castings, and it just helps with the castings. All right. So I'm going to add to that, which I never really usually add this to my bedding, because rock dust is a clay. It's also real super fine. This is a super fine powder. It has tons of minerals. This scoop is about a tablespoon and a half. So I'm going to add that's probably 2 tablespoons. But I never add that to any of my bedding because rock dust, even though it's good, and I probably should add it to my bedding because it'll make it readily available for the your plants and things like that. But I don't usually add rock dust because rock dust takes a long time to break down, and it's not, I said it's readily available, but it's really not readily available. It might be readily available for the plants next year, the following year, as it starts to break down. So I'm making a small batch because this is going to be a test. It's going to be an experiment. To that, I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of crab meal. And this is crab meal I make myself. I buy the crab flakes, I put it in my bullet, and I actually mix it up I blend it up really, really fine. So I want it to be as fine as I can get it. And that's what you end up with. And crab meal also has a lot of benefits for your plants. It adds chitin to your castings, the worms. It's a little bit of grit for them also. So it's actually a beneficiary for your worms. So that's what I'm going to add. That was 2 tablespoons of crab meal. And also to that, now I'm going to also add, I'm going in not a specific order. This is dried peat moss. I didn't want to do a moisten. I'm going to do it's dry, it's fine. I sifted it. It's all the super fine. If I wanted to, I could probably sift this through my cylinder to actually get even finer. And maybe that's what I'll do. Give me a second. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sift actually the peat moss through this cylinder to really get super fine. The super fine particles. That's all I want is the super fine. And your worms will definitely eat the peat moss, so that's actually a good thing. So that's all the bigger pieces. Unfortunately, it's not, I was going to put 2 cups in, but since I sifted it, it's probably about 1.5 cups of peat moss, dry peat moss. So that's what I got. I'm going to mix this up also. Mix it really good. And I didn't want a clump of mess, so that's why it's dry peat moss. It's not a ton of peat moss, but enough for them to eat. And it's just another base for the worms to have a little something. I have a worm bin that needs to be harvested, which I'll probably harvest one day during the week. And those particular worms will go in new bedding. And then I will start the experiment to see how they go through this. So the last ingredient I'm actually going to add to that is, here it says 1 full cup. And this is my worm chow, what I call worm chow plus, because when I make my worm chow, I add a couple of other nutrients into it. I actually add alfalfa meal, and I add kelp. I add eggshells to it. So even though I added in some of the crab meal that has the chitin, the eggshell is the calcium and the other nutrients. So this is 1 cup. And I didn't add any additional, that's the reason why I didn't add any additional kelp or alfalfa meal, because my bedding, my worm chow already has those 2 items in it. So there's no sense. So you just want to mix it up really good. I want to mix it up really, really good. And I really, like I said, I wanted to keep it dry. And this has all the stuff your worms love, except for a sugar base. But you do get a sugar base out of the kelp. Kelp does have some sugars in it, so it definitely is a benefit for your worms. But this is what you come out with, and I like what that looks like. That looks good. Now, when I watched the video of this gentleman who, I can't remember the name of the worm farm, he actually took this, and what he did was he fed his worms once a week, twice a week. And what he did is, I don't particularly know how much he put on, but it was anywhere in between 1 inch to 3 inches of this particular feeding. And the worms will come up and eat that. We all know when you sprinkle the worm chow, your homemade worm chow, your worm bedding, anything you add onto it, they will come up and they will eat it. So they will definitely come up and eat what you actually are feeding them. And that's the good thing about worms. They will come up and they will eat. So they're almost like top feeders. But this looks good. But we're gonna actually start to feed them this once I do a new bedding, and I'm probably gonna put a nice helping on. I'm probably gonna feed it probably about 1/4 cup each time. And I'm gonna pay attention to how many days it takes for the worms that are in that particular bedding, in that bin, to actually eat and finish off this particular bedding. And if I see that they do extremely well with it, then I'll make a big batch of it. But right now, because this is just a experiment, a test, just to see how your worms do with it, that's all I'm going to do. And I'll probably mess around with this also, adding in more of the kelp and more of the more of the kelp and more of the alfalfa meal. And even I might even add in some alpaca manure. So what I want to do is I have just a plastic bag. I'm going to put it in a plastic bag. Just transfer it to a plastic bag. And that probably made maybe about a quarter of a pound, a half a pound to a pound of worm food. Shake it up real good to actually incorporate everything. And then, like I said, when I harvest my next bin, I have a bin I didn't feed any pumpkin to. I'm actually going to feed this to the worms. And also I'm going to look for two different things. I'm going to look and see how fast they eat it. And I'm also going to see if they increase in size. So with the peat moss though, when I do my bedding for peat moss, using peat moss, I do not do like I was doing with the alpaca manure. Because in the alpaca manure bedding, they're living in their feed. So they're eating their feed. So I don't like to, I would do with the alpaca manure, I would do about 6 inches. With the peat moss bedding, which has everything that I would do in the peat moss, except, everything I would do in the alpaca bedding, I would do in the peat moss. I add all the minerals, I add the paper, the cardboard, keep the good moisture. The only thing is I do it at probably about anywhere from 3 inches to 4 inches. So that works out good. This looks good. I'm going to give it a try. And if it works, then this is what I'm also going to start to feed my worms. And I think what I'll get out of that is better castings because of the biochar going through it, going through their gut and coming out in their castings. So, because it's so fine. But this is what I wanted. This is what I wanted to try. I was always looking for another way, and that's why when I make my worm chow, I add other minerals to it to give the worm something else to chew on. So what they eat is what comes out in your castings. So it looks good. So check back. I'll put up the video as soon as I can after I harvest the bin and I feed the bin. I'll actually feed them this, and we'll keep an eye on it over a couple of days and kind of see where we are, how they're doing with it, if it's just sitting there. I also was going to experiment with also mixing the worm chow into their bedding. So when I make their bedding, or I'm getting ready to put that new bedding in my bin, what I had planned on doing was put a cup of the worm chow into the bedding, mix it in real good before I put it in, mix it in real good, and then allow them to see how they do with that. See if they eat it from there and not feeding them, especially with using the peat moss. But I've heard from time from different people, don't do that because it could heat up the bin. It could also ferment in the bin, which could kill your worms. And I've had enough problems with worms dying off that I don't want to do that. So I'm going to try this and see how this goes and water it in a little bit just so it's moist for them. First I'll put it in dry, see how they do, and then I'll gradually add some moisture to it. So I appreciate you guys watching the videos. If you get a chance, like, subscribe, so you can see the content I'm putting out. But I'm always trying different things because I'm trying to make the best castings that I can. So anything that I can try, I will try, just to make the best castings. So once again, this is Rother from New Era Gardener. Thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of your day. I appreciate you. Thank you.